What's up, Hoosier Nation? This is Ricky Tamus and Sean Ratcher back with another episode of the Rock Report. Sean and I were just in Bloomington for that 63-10 win over Illinois. Sean, it was a pretty awesome game to be at. Give us your thoughts. Just talk about the atmosphere. We obviously know 5 touchdowns, 63 points on the board, but talk a little bit about the atmosphere, being there. Former player, um, seeing that stadium packed, seeing how it actually game day, everything. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, before we get into any of the stats here or anything like that, just talking about what Bloomington was like on a Saturday all day long. Tailgate scene was probably the best I've seen in Bloomington in recent history, maybe one of the best of all time. Most fans we've ever had in the stadium. So definitely, one of the best overall fan experiences that Bloomington's had here in, history, essentially. I was just really excited to see the fans, all show up, rally around this team. I really think this team has a lot of potential. I think they showed that on Saturday. When you go in and you beat the absolute piss out of the number 9 team in the country, obviously has great implications on the playoff picture here for the rest of the year. I think overall, this athletic department's really starting to add some things to the stadium where we're kind of needed to fill gaps before. I think the atmosphere was great. I think the towels, something we definitely need to continue. Obviously, as the stadium itself starts to improve, we add some suites, club levels, whatever it might be. The experience is just going to keep getting better and better in Bloomington.
Yeah. And diving a little bit into the game, Isaiah Bones Jones, I guess that's his new nickname everyone was saying. Don't know who made that up, but it does rhyme. I mean, that first quarter was pretty impressive, especially on his end. Uh, Offense started a little slow. That punt block by D'Angelo Pons, got him right back in it. 7-0 start, but then Illinois, Luke Altmaier had a quick answer there on that 59-yard touchdown to Colin Dixon. And then, you kind of sit in there, as former Hoosiers, it's like 7-7. Now let's see what's going to happen to the rest of the game. But Isaiah Bones Jones, I mean, if you just watched that first quarter alone, he was an animal on the field, really setting the tone for the defense. Couple mishaps in the secondary. Obviously, all that can get corrected. But when you have a player like Isaiah, a guy like Aiden Fisher, Mario Landino, Tyreek Tucker, those guys were playing balls to the wall, sideline to sideline. Um, Elijah Hardy, all those guys playing together, playing their hearts out. Teams are going to see the little couple lapses on film and try and exploit that. But when you have players like that who all they want to do is go beat the guy in front of you, relentless pressure all game, it's pretty easy to be successful. And obviously why they held that Illinois offense to only 10 points after that.
Yeah, I think when we talk about why this happened, right, getting into kind of what really led to Indiana blowing Illinois out on Saturday, I think the biggest thing was Fernando Mendoza's touch on the football really, really improved and has improved since the first game. I think connection, something that really you kind of take for granted, in days of the past, but given what the transfer portal is nowadays, it takes time, to grow that chemistry between players. I think we've really seen Mendoza take some of these receivers under his wing, figure out what was wrong. He talked last week in his press conference about a couple different things between him and Surratt and him and Cooper they needed to fix. And it seemed this week everything was fixed. I mean, he could not miss on a throw. On a defensive point, like you said, Isaiah Jones stepped up huge for the Hoosiers this week. He's a guy that, has really grown into his role over his career at Indiana. And I think it's good to see that, with guys like Mikal Kamara, who really is not getting a ton of production so far this year because teams just refuse to run the ball his way, there are other guys stepping up and making plays for this football team. I think the secondary, you saw a lot of young guys play some pretty good football on Saturday. Obviously, Sig talked about there's a couple slip ups deep in the secondary with the safeties that'll get cleaned up this week. But I mean, damn near a perfect football game played for the Hoosiers on Saturday.
Yeah, and obviously Fernando Mendoza, 5 passing touchdown. He has elite touch, only 2 incompletions that whole game. It is something to note that 4 straight games of 300 plus rushing yards from the Indiana front. That offensive line, they have no give up, especially Bob Bostad is kind of put everything he has in his coaching repertoire um, into those five guys up front, made those guys powerful. Obviously, Labibi going down a couple weeks ago. A next man up, Kobe Martin comes in. He's had back-to-back 100-yard rushing games with two big touchdowns. Uh, this team is just, they're up to over 1,200 yards rushing on the season. One of the top five rushing attacks in the Big Ten, in the college football whole landscape. It's just there's no quit anywhere in this offense. Mendoza responsible for 16 total touchdowns all season. These Hoosiers just don't stop scoring.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk about in terms of separating Indiana from other teams in the college football landscape, Cignetti doesn't play a normal type of football. Most teams, end of the half, minute or so to go, they start to, run the ball, take a knee, run the clock out. Cignetti sees any sort of clock as more opportunity to score, more opportunity to grow the resume of Indiana football as a whole. I think when we talk about this roster holistically, I think you see a lot of guys step into roles that on other college football teams might not be, seen as the type of guys that can play in these roles. From a size standpoint, for instance, take a guy like D'Angelo Ponce. D'Angelo Ponce is by no means a large human being. Listed at 5'8", I'd be amazed if he's anywhere close to 5'8", but extremely athletic football player. And I think what Cignetti really has shown over the past, season and a half now is some of these skill players that were Sun Belt guys that were overlooked because of their size, they can compete in this league, right? And I think as the season goes on, you'll start to see a little bit more of, some of these names that you haven't seen a ton of yet, but are on this roster that, have potential to produce pretty highly. Mario Landino, great opportunity for him this week to make some plays. He was a guy that, got into the rotation a little bit last year, younger guy, but I mean, absolutely flashed in what was, a game against a top 10 football team in Bloomington this past Saturday.
Yeah, and Sean, obviously, speaking of guys stepping up, uh, on Wednesday this week, Lou Moore has his hearing with court to see if he's eligible. Um, Talk to us a little bit about that, like the guys in his role. If it's a big blow if we do lose him after his 4 games in the season. He's so far leading tackler for the Hoosiers, 23 total tackles, 2 interceptions, just a great all-around player in the middle of the field.
Yeah, obviously a situation that we're going to watch closely. Obviously, we want to see Lou play the rest of the season, but some of the reports that we've been hearing, some of the people we've been talking to, the outlook on it is not really that clear so far. It seems that it's a very cloudy situation. The NCAA seems to be doing everything in their power to stop him from playing football the rest of the season, which is absolutely terrible for him, just as a player trying to finish out his career. In terms of guys that might step up into that role, this defensive back, couple of rooms here. You talk about DBs, you got safeties as well. A lot of these guys are athletic enough they can play multiple positions. You might see some guys rotate over. I would expect to see a lot of the Jamari Sharp, Amari Farrell crew step into, fill this role. There's a couple young guys as well that, we'll see if they get some freshmen into the mix, but you got to have contingency plans when you have this type of situation going on. Obviously, we wish the best for Lou and hope that, he gets approved to play the rest of the season, but I think Cignetti has a fairly deep Rolodex of athletes that can play on this football team in just about any position on the defense.
Yeah, another big thing coming out of this game after that huge win versus Illinois, uh, Fernando Mendoza, #1 in the Heisman voting. That is just talking about Kurt Cignetti, kind of talking about what he's done in Indiana. First season takes a team to playoffs. Right now, they're 4 games in, 4-0, same as last year, but there's a little bit of more storyline on this team. Last year was all these underdogs coming together. Now, they're the front runners. Having quarterback, Heisman favorite. Tell us a little bit like Fernando, obviously, we hear him speak post game, how highly he speaks of his team, everyone around him. Uh, it's obviously not something that's going to get into his head, but they're no longer underdogs. They're no longer just like a group of misfits going to win football games. This is a front-running team. And tell us a little bit, Sean, how as a football player, that could affect the mindset, and obviously Kurt Cignetti, how he'll be able to address that.
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at last year's roster versus this year's, last year's guys were good football players that did well in a smaller league and came into a system that Cignetti runs that essentially propelled this football team to the college football playoff. You do that in year one, start to stack some NIL, obviously with rev share. Indiana overall had more resources going into this football season. You have top tier talent on this roster. Fernando Mendoza, I would say very, very unarguably is now the best college football player in America. This is not a strong QB class, and he is bounds ahead of the rest of the guys that are going to be in this draft class. I think when you talk about these situations that arise earlier on in the season, we've seen before, given situations with, the 2020 roster, et cetera, where it gets to guys' head a little bit, right? You start to get a feel for, I'm the man. I'm going to go to the league at the end of the year or next year, whatever it might be, and you essentially take your foot off the gas a little bit because you can coast through. Kurt Cignetti's not that guy, right? He's not going to allow this football team to slow down. He's not going to allow this football team to take their foot off the gas. I think when it comes to Fernando Mendoza, the one thing I like about this kid is I think he understands the bigger picture here, right? When you see him talk in interviews, it's not just because, he's not that well spoken just because. He's that well spoken because he cares about what he does, right? He cares about how he represents this team, this university, his family. This kid's a detail guy, right? There's not a detail that goes overlooked in his book. When there's something small that goes wrong in this game, you see it improve the following week. So I really don't expect this to get to his head too much, but I think you really see this kid continue to take steps forward over the next few weeks and into the second half of the season.
Yeah, it's a well-spoken quarterback, well-spoken team. Uh, they use kind of outside noise to fuel them. They listen to what people say. They create an underdog story in their head. We saw from Fernando Mendoza talk about how the Illinois defensive coordinator said it wasn't fully polished yet. He took that and kind of used it, fueled his fire. Um, Obviously, great performance from him. But diving into next week, um, Hoosiers are 4-0. They on their way to Iowa. Iowa's a great, very physical team. 3-1 in the Big Ten, coming off 10-point road win versus Rutgers. That game Saturday, September 27th, 3:30 in Kinnick Stadium. Sean, you played in Kinnick. Before we dive into the game, just tell us a tiny bit about that game. I know I was kind of, I believe, 2021 season. We were riding big high with Penix, and not much went in our favor that game.
Yeah, very, very similar game to what Indiana has this week. So we went into that game just as Indiana's going to go into this game. You're on your high horse, right? We came off the best season in Indiana football history. 2020, you were ranked seventh in the country, the highest ranking of any Indiana football team ever, which luckily that's still a standing stat. I would assume not many weeks longer is that stat going to be relevant. But you go into this game and you're thinking Big Ten West. You're thinking, all right, we can beat Iowa. You walk in, first thing that's going to hit you, pink locker room, right? They're throwing you off a little bit. They want you to be uncomfortable. As you walk down the tunnel into Kinnick Stadium, well, before we walked down that tunnel into Kinnick Stadium, you saw David Holloman put on the Indiana jersey. But you walk down this tunnel into Kinnick Stadium and you see Iowa's sideline. Iowa's sideline's got about 10 or 15 yards of space, pretty wide, stretches the length of the sideline there. You look at the Indiana side, there might be 10 to 15 feet before the fans are right on top of your neck. They've got a packed out stadium every Saturday. Very, very nice stadium, but the pressure is going to be on. That place gets loud. I think one thing that isn't mentioned a ton, but when you talk about why stadiums are loud, why a stadium like Michigan isn't loud, the build of Iowa is so that everyone's right on top of you. In terms of communication, it's going to be essentially hard this week. Last year, we saw the Hoosiers struggle a ton in the Ohio State game because you couldn't hear the snap count, right? So cleaning up whatever we need to in terms of communication. This week, you would assume they practice with music or with the speakers on, whatever it might be. Need to make sure that the play calls get in, need to make sure that everyone's on the same page to minimize mistakes in this football game.
Yeah, and we saw obviously last year in that Ohio State game trying to go to silent count, never really practiced silent count, didn't work too well. Cignetti said he had a plan. He wasn't going to disclose his plan. But, we talk a lot about Indiana football, a lot about the offense, but a lot about our offensive line, 300 plus yards rushing each game. Uh, I do want to focus on Iowa just to go through before naming them. Left tackle, number one left tackle in the country. The right tackle should be number one, but the left tackle is number two. Um, Across the board, left guard number one graded PFF grade, center number one, uh, right guard number one, right tackle number two. This is the highest grade offensive line unit in the country, especially led by Jennings Dunker. Great guy. Mike Haydick, one of our former roommates, went this past summer, hung out with him a little bit. But this is up front. He is the leader of that unit. This is the number one offensive line in the country. One of the best units, best rooms. This is a classic Big Ten football that I would just kind of relies on those guys up front. Sean, talk a little bit about Mark Gronowski, kind of their brand new quarterback. Give us a little bit preview of that part of the offense.
Yeah, when we talk about a guy like Mark Gronowski, a pretty athletic guy to be playing quarterback, Iowa obviously is known to be a run-first football team with a pretty average pass game. They're not known to score a ton of points, but they always have a stout defense and play very, very clean special teams. A couple of things we saw over the past couple of weeks, their kickoff return game is immaculate. They have one of the fastest returners in the country. They're going to tear you apart on special teams. They're going to try to get very, very good field placement going into their drives. When we talk about their offense, like we mentioned, run first identity of the best offensive line in the nation. Indiana's done very well over the past few weeks on a defensive line standpoint, but this is going to be the biggest challenge for them. On the flip side of the football, Iowa is known for great, great, great linebackers, right? In the box, they're going to play very hard-nosed football, a very physical front seven. This is a massive challenge for Indiana's offensive line. I think the offensive line play last week for Indiana improved a ton, but the first couple weeks you saw some communication errors. It seemed like guys were late getting off of double teams, climbing to the next level. A couple mistakes. They were trying to figure out kind of who works in what mix. Going into this week, like we mentioned, it's going to be loud. Communication is going to be tough, but if you don't communicate well, this front seven for Iowa will tear you apart.
Yeah, and Jaden Harrell's that guy in the middle on Iowa, number 41, big time linebacker, 28 tackles on the season. He's the guy at the green dot. He's the one that's going to be setting up that defense, everything they need to do. Big news out of Iowa. Leading rusher is out for the game. Jason Patterson. He is out. But, it really doesn't matter who you put behind that offensive line. Next man up mentality, Xavier Williams. He's 26 carries on the season, 186 yards. They're pretty similar to Indiana in terms of that stable. They have about 3 to 4 running backs that they like to give carries. Anything's going to work in front of that offensive line. Mario Landino, Tyreek Tucker, both have 3 sacks on the season. Going to be a really big game from them up front, trying to limit anything on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what to look for in this football game, you have an explosive offense from Indiana going against a very, very disciplined defense in Iowa. In terms of road environment, right, we need a clean start for Indiana and to minimize turnovers. Iowa's one of those teams, when you give them a chance to sneak in there and take away the football game, they will. They're not a team that's going to tear you apart from a points category, right? This game is likely going to be a low scoring football game unless Indiana can get their pass game going early on. In terms of who I'm looking at this week, I think Mendoza being able to handle the pressure of the front seven from Iowa as well as that offensive line. How much time can we give Mendoza to make these throws? He's been very, very good the past few weeks, catching the ball, getting it off quickly. Second being, can Indiana establish their run game early? In terms of what we've seen, I mentioned getting off some blocks late, climbing to the second level late. You can't do this during this football game, right? Indiana is going to have to be quick off the football. They're going to have to control the run game. Obviously, my favorite segment to talk about here, special teams this week. Indiana's punt block game has been incredible so far this season. Special teams coordinator Grant Kane, I think, does an incredible job. I think they know when to put the pressure on and when to hold up, giving Jonathan Brady time to make great plays in the return game. In terms of Iowa, Iowa's been known the past few years to be a team that'll pin you inside the 10-yard line. I would expect Iowa to have a great return game this week. I would expect them to have a great punt game this week. What will make the difference for Indiana on special teams is getting enough pressure on their punter and minimizing return yards from their kick returns. In terms of what to look for on special teams, I would say Jonathan Brady. This is a game I would see him making a huge, huge difference in how this Indiana offense is able to perform based on the field possession he gives them.
Yeah, like the great Bill Lynch said, special teams, special players, special plays. But moving it over, um, my big matchup to look at, is going to be between Iowa's tackles, Trevor Locke and Jennings Dunker, and the kind of the household name, Mikal Kamara. This is a guy who you could say he's been silenced. Uh, if you just read stats, if you just look at total tackles and stuff, total sacks, you could say he's been silent. Um, but if you look at win rate, rush win rate, he's still one of the top defensive ends in the country. What he is doing is allowing for guys like Mario Landino, Tyreek Tucker, 6 sacks combined, those two, which is pretty, you never really hear D tackles getting sacks because he is getting so much kind of pressure off the edge where teams have to game plan around him. Um, and he's definitely a guy who's hard on himself, and he knows that the sacks are going to come. Just keep working. Sacks are going to come. I do think this is going to be a big game out of Mikal Kamara coming into week 5. I think he is going to put together a master class on the edge. Uh, people have to stop, only focusing on him just because of what's been happening around the whole D line. One of the top D lines, you allow Illinois only 2 rushing yards. So it's going to be really cool to see how it happens, what they do out there. But Mikal Kamara breakout game, obviously had a breakout season last year, is going to come, and I believe in this game.
Yeah, I think the major takeaways this week, Indiana showed in the Illinois game. Obviously, they can dominate all three phases of the football. Need to continue that going into this game. This is going to be the biggest test for the Hoosiers so far this season. In terms of, what we got to look for this week, what is the test made up of? Hostile environment is going to be a major, major factor into this, right? It's going to be very, very loud. First time this Indiana football team goes on the road. When you've got a team full of transfers, going on the road for the first time can be essentially a whirlwind of things you're not used to, right? Getting these guys in their comfort zone and ready to roll as soon as this game starts is going to be paramount for this Indiana football team. In terms of what to look for, limiting turnovers, controlling the trenches, and keeping the momentum. Foot on the gas all the way through this football game. Cannot let Iowa control the tempo. As soon as Iowa takes the tempo away from Indiana, this game starts to get away from them a little bit, right? Iowa's very, very good at controlling the tempo of football games and putting teams in the position they want them and pouncing on them as soon as they get the chance.
Yeah, Indiana has done a really good job keeping that football safe. Uh, no turnovers, forced a takeaway in the last game versus Illinois. That is a recipe for success. Obviously turnover margin and time of possession. Two things that we're going to see, especially on the road, first road game of the season. Two things that Kurt Signetti and the Indiana football team are going to take very seriously, trying to hold that ball as long as they can. Sometimes it's hard to hold the ball when you just keep scoring touchdowns, but you're definitely going to see kind of a little bit of I wouldn't really say a safe approach, but they're going to do all they can to hold that ball, keep scoring touchdowns, play it, as safe as they can to win a football game.
Yeah, I think when we talk in terms of safety, kind of what is going to happen, what we foresee happening during this football game, Indiana is not going to take as many chances during this football game. I think trying to control the tempo, trying to make sure they keep Iowa on their heels the entire game is going to be the difference here, right? Obviously, Kurt Cignetti's the type of guy, as soon as he sees a chance, he's going to take this football game and run away with it. But earlier on, Indiana is going to have to figure out what can we establish against this Iowa team? Iowa, across the board, I wouldn't say is extremely talented. They have talented pieces. Finding holes in their offensive line, finding holes in their defensive front seven is going to be a huge difference for this Hoosiers football team. I think my prediction this week, I think Indiana runs away with this one 42-21. I think late in the football game, you'll see Indiana score a couple touchdowns and run away with this for a bigger margin here.
Great prediction, Sean. And it's so hard to actually like give a proper prediction because you go to a football game, you're playing the number 9 team. Um, we go watch that game and game ends and you're like, how did you even put 63 points on the board? I mean, I don't even know where 9 touchdowns were scored. I was standing there the whole game watching. Um, some beers, sometimes I missed a couple of them, but it's kind of crazy to see, a team dominate um, a football game like that, and that it's hard to say that they're always going to win a game by 50, but kind of watching that, watching the energy, seeing how those kids react, especially post game, nothing gets to their heads. This is, it's a football school. It's really cool to see a football school and those kids on the football team know that they are football schools and they're the best athletes in the country. I'm going to take this, I think they go back and put up 50. I do think so. It's going to be around like 50 to like 12, 50 to 13. It's hard to say every Big Ten game is going to be so low scoring like you've always seen in the past, hard-nosed football when you have such an explosive offense.
Yeah, I think great prediction there. It's really hard to tell going into games like this how teams are going to be against Indiana. I think Indiana has the chance this year. I think they've shown that they might be one of the top five football teams in the country. I think their offense is very, very explosive, a very, very good defense. I think this is a good indicator of how good our defense is going to be, right? Iowa's run game is going to be very, very, very strong. I think Indiana has a lot of pieces that flashed last week in the pass rush game. I think if we can take away Iowa's run, putting those two games together, Illinois and Iowa, you know that this is likely going to be a top 10 football team for the rest of the season.
And that's a great episode of the Rock Report. Good to see a bunch of you guys in Bloomington come up to us, get a little bit of recognition, especially walking into the line. Uh, we saw Quinn Warren's parents. He was on our last episode. They thanked us for our Pizza X, and we thank you, Pizza X, for allowing us to have uh, that NIL great partnership with them for student athletes at Indiana to come on the pod.
Yeah, thank you guys again for watching another episode of the Rock Report. Looking forward to a great matchup this Saturday at Kinnick Stadium, Indiana taking on Iowa. As always, go Hoosiers. Thank you guys for watching.